A hushed whisper in the corridors of Buckingham Palace changed everything, and Queen Camilla would never look at her husband the same again. It began on an ordinary winter morning, though something about the air felt heavier, colder, more deliberate. The palace staff exchanged nervous glances, their eyes darting toward the end of the hallway, where two senior aides stood clutching a folder of unseen test results. Nobody dared to speak aloud, but the tension between them was thick enough to choke on. Outside the grand gates, the public carried on oblivious, charmed by the usual royal façade, while behind these walls, the weight of something catastrophic settled quietly. Camilla sensed it almost immediately. At first, it was little things, an icy silence over breakfast, the hesitant way staff members avoided her gaze, and the way Charles would vanish into his study for hours. What truly unsettled her was the way even his most trusted aides seemed unwilling to meet her eyes. Every time she entered a room, conversations would abruptly die, replaced by the quiet shuffling of feet and rehearsed smiles. She found herself alone in corridors that should have been bustling with the familiar hum of royal life. When Charles suddenly began canceling public engagements without notice, suspicions only deepened. Official statements claimed fatigue, but Camilla knew better. He had never let fatigue deter him before, and now locked doors greeted her at every turn. Even the familiar key to his private study no longer worked. On several occasions, she caught glimpses of secret meetingsmen in somber suits, slipping in and out of chambers at odd hours, always with folders tucked under their arms, always whispering. Late one evening, long after she thought everyone had retired, she heard the word that sent a chill racing down her spine. Irreversible. It was spoken softly, yet it rang louder than a gunshot. And as Camilla steels herself to uncover the truth, what she overhears in the next room leaves her breathless. Camilla couldn't wait any longer. She cornered Charles in his study, demanding the truth. But nothing could prepare her for his icy confession. The tension that had been simmering for days finally ignited as she quietly slipped into the dimly lit room where he sat, hunched over a pile of scattered papers. Determination fueled her steps, though inside she trembled. She closed the door behind her with a quiet click, a sound that seemed to jar Charles out of his thoughts. He looked up briefly, his eyes clouded and distant, and then quickly dropped his gaze to the papers before him, as though hoping she would simply leave. But Camilla stood firm, her voice low but sharp as she demanded to know what he was hiding. Charles didn't answer at first. His fingers fidgeted with the edge of a document, the knuckles pale and stiff. He shuffled the papers as though searching for something, but really, he was just buying time. When he finally spoke, his voice was brittle and full of quiet defeat. "They warned me it would come to this," he murmured, almost to himself, his words slicing through the silence like a blade. Camilla froze, stunned by the cryptic remark, unsure whether to press him further or retreat into the safety of denial. But denial had never been her way. She took a step closer, leaning across the desk, her eyes locked on his. "What do you mean?" she demanded. "What would come to this?" Her words cracked with fear she could no longer mask. Charles exhaled heavily, his hand shaking as he finally allowed himself to meet her gaze. The word, terminal, slipped from his lips not as a full sentence, but as a fractured admission that knocked the breath from her chest. She staggered back slightly, her hands gripping the edge of the desk for support. But Charles still refused to finish his thought, still refused to name it. His silence only deepened her terror. "Say it," she hissed. "Say what it is." But he merely shook his head, muttering something about sparing her the weight of knowing too much. That answer, more than anything, shattered what little composure she had left. Her temper flared, her grief twisting into anger. "You're shutting me out because you think I care more about appearances than you," she accused, her voice rising in fury. "You think I care about protecting my image while you're dying behind closed doors?" Charles finally rose to his feet, his own anger flaring as he shot back that she'd never understand, that she'd never carried the burden of wearing the crown while knowing it was slipping through his fingers. For a long moment, they stared at each other, both gasping in the quiet aftermath of their argument, their love and pain tangled into something unrecognizable. But even her worst fears seemed merciful compared to the storm that followed when the doctors finally spoke in detail. In a private chamber, the royal physician delivered a verdict that left Camilla clinging to the chair for support and Charles staring silently at the wall. The room felt suffocating, as though the very air had turned against her. The doctor's voice, calm yet merciless, sliced through her like a blade as he explained the truth. Advanced, stage illness, already spreading aggressively, leaving no room for optimism. Camilla's breath hitched as the words sank in, and though her instinct was to reach for Charles, he stayed frozen, his eyes locked on some invisible point beyond the doctor's shoulder. The phrase, months, not years, feels like a hammer between them. Camilla's fingers found Charles's sleeve, gripping it as though by sheer force of will she could stop time, hold him here, undo what she'd just heard. But he wouldn't even look at her. That distance so deliberate, so cruel, cut deeper than the diagnosis itself. Her voice cracked when she finally managed to speak, a quiet plea, asking if there were treatments, options, experimental trials, anything at all they hadn't yet considered. But the physician only shook his head, a sad, measured gesture that sealed her despair. And still Charles sat unmoved, his calmness infuriating her now. He didn't flinch, he didn't protest. It was as though he had already buried himself in some private grave she wasn't invited to share. The composure that had always defined him now became a wall between them. Camilla's own restraint collapsed as she stood abruptly, her words exploding through the room before she could stop them. "We're not finished, we can't be." Her voice, ragged and desperate, cracked under the weight of everything she was refusing to accept. And then, before the stunned eyes of the physician and aides, she broke down completely, her hands covering her face, as if to shield herself from the unbearable finality of it all. But just when it seems the palace has hit rock bottom, the Queen discovers an even deeper betrayal lurking beneath the surface. As Camilla searches for answers, she stumbles across a secret file and realizes Charles had been hiding more than just his diagnosis. In the days that followed the doctor's verdict, whispers in the palace halls grew louder, carrying her name like a ghost, and punctuated with one ominous phrase she couldn't ignore: the confidential letter. The words clung to her mind, taunting her, until late one night, her determination to uncover the full truth overpowered any fear of what she might find. She slipped into his private quarters, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and defiance. It didn't take long to find a file buried deep within a drawer, marked in bold letters. Private, not to be discussed. Her hands trembled as she opened it, a chill coursing through her veins as the first page revealed dates and letters going back far longer than she had imagined. Page after page exposed medical correspondence that left no doubt Charles had known of his condition for years. The betrayal deepened with each discovery. There were names of specialists she had never heard of, meetings she had never been told about, secret consultations and decisions made without her knowledge. Her stomach turned as she realized how deliberately he had excluded her, how he had chosen to carry this alone and, in doing so, left her to stumble blindly into his carefully constructed silence. Her heartbreak quickly morphed into fury. Storming into his study, a file clutched in her hand, her voice broke as she confronted him. "Why didn't you let me fight with you?" she demanded, tears of grief and rage mingling in her words. But Charles, his face unreadable, only met her with that same infuriating calm. His reply, soft yet cutting, silenced her. "You weren't meant to carry this burden." But Camilla refuses to be shut out, and her next move shocks even her closest advisors. No longer willing to stand by, Camilla orchestrates a desperate intervention that risks tearing the family apart. The sting of betrayal still fresh in her mind, she emerged from her private chambers with renewed resolve, summoning the royal advisors into an emergency meeting before dawn. Her voice, unshaken and commanding, cut through their murmurs as she laid out a plan to pursue unorthodox treatments abroad. She argued that staying idle was no longer an option, that allowing Charles to drift quietly into decline was something she refused to accept. But resistance came swiftly. Members of Charles's inner circle, who had grown accustomed to her deference, now accused her of overstepping, of ignoring protocol in a fit of panic. Their disapproval didn't stop her. In fact, it seemed to fuel her defiance. She spent hours on the phone with foreign doctors, bypassing traditional channels entirely and breaking strict palace protocol. The more they resisted, the more determined she became. But her determination came at a price. Within days, leaks to the press painted her as frantic and overbearing. Headlines screamed that she was manipulating a dying king, desperate to protect her place beside him at any cost. The palace was thrown into disarray. Her private calls with specialists in Europe and America sparked rumors of a cover-up, and whispers about her meddling reached even the highest offices. William and Harry, once quiet in their grief, confronted her in private, accusing her of exploiting their father's illness to control the narrative. The sting of their words cut deeper than the public's judgment, leaving her reeling but unbroken. And yet, For all her efforts, the phone calls, the clandestine consultations, the relentless planning, Charles's health continued to decline. Each day, his strength faded before her eyes, mocking her frantic resolve. Her desperation, once her armor, now began to feel like a chain, dragging her further from the family she was trying so hard to save. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the next revelation, one that struck at the very heart of her marriage. In a dusty safe buried deep within Clarence's house, Camilla uncovers a hidden will, and what she reads leaves her knees buckling. That night, in a fit of desperation and driven by a gnawing suspicion she could no longer ignore, she found herself alone in Charles's private quarters, her fingers tracing the edges of the heavy cabinet where his most personal effects were kept. The key had been carelessly left in place, as though mocking her hesitation. She turned it slowly, feeling the weight of everything she was about to discover before the door even opened. Inside lay an assortment of old letters, royal seals, and forgotten trinkets, each a fragment of the life they had shared, but which now felt like a stranger's story. And then her eyes caught a single envelope, thick and heavy, its surface marked with the words, "In the event of my passing." The blood drained from her face as she lifted it, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Peeling it open revealed a truth more devastating than any diagnosis. The will named Catherine and the children as the primary heirs to his personal estate, while Camilla, his wife, his partner, his so-called queen, was left only the most perfunctory of acknowledgments. It was as though she had merely passed through his life without ever truly belonging to it. But the cruelest blow waited inside the smaller folded page, tucked behind the will, a personal letter. As she read, the words blurred through her tears, but their meaning was impossible to escape. Charles confessed his deep regrets, and spoke of a love that had never truly faded, a love for another, unnamed but unmistakable. Each sentence drove another stake into her heart, stripping her of the illusions she had clung to for years. Camilla sobbed, her body shaking as though the room itself were collapsing around her. In that moment, she felt erased, not just from his future, but from his past, his present, from everything. The realization struck her cold. She had never truly been his first choice, not even at the end, not even now when time was running out. But the palace's silence can't last. The public soon catches wind of the unfolding tragedy, and the walls begin to close in. When the press finally uncovers Charles's condition, Camilla faces a tidal wave of scrutiny and an unexpected backlash that leaves her reeling. The leaks begin quietly at first, a few whispers printed in obscure columns hinting at his frailty. But within days, the speculation ignites into a firestorm, and every headline screams of his decline. Photographers swarm the gates, their cameras hungry for proof. And then they capture Camilla herself, caught off guard, and visibly in tears. Her face, a portrait of grief and desperation. Those images spread like wildfire, fueling lurid stories of her supposed breakdown. The public reaction is brutal in its chaos. For some, the sight of her anguish draws sympathy. They see a devoted wife, battling for the man she loves against impossible odds. But others, louder and more vicious, accuse her of meddling where she doesn't belong, of clinging too tightly to a crown she was never meant to wear. Social media erupts with venom, painting her as manipulative and cold-hearted, a woman scheming to secure her future before the inevitable. Through it all, Charles remains maddeningly stoic. Each rare public appearance shows him serene and restrained, never acknowledging the growing storm around him. He refuses to address the rumors or even acknowledge his illness, a silence that only deepens Camilla's rage. His composure, once a source of admiration, now feels like a betrayal, leaving her to endure the scrutiny alone while he shields himself behind royal dignity. Newspapers dig deeper, accusing her outright of orchestrating the frenzy to position herself as indispensable, to cement her place before it's too late. Columnists speculate about her late-night calls, her unapproved decisions, her relentless drive, all spun as acts of ambition rather than love. The whispers become shouts, and soon even her allies grow quiet, unwilling to defend her publicly. At last, under the crushing weight of the spotlight, Camilla retreats from public view. The palace releases carefully worded statements about her needing rest, but behind the walls, she feels every fracture in her reputation cutting deeper. Yet even in her isolation, she refuses to let herself believe it is over, because she senses that something worse is still waiting in the shadows. And then, just as she begins to withdraw completely, Charles calls for her, setting the stage for their final, devastating encounter. In their private chambers, Charles beckons Camilla closer and whispers a final confession that shatters what little strength she has left. The room is quiet when she enters, yet the stillness feels heavier than the clamor of the outside world. She finds him in bed, his frame diminished, his presence weakened to a shadow of the man she once knew. Even in his fragility, there remains something dignified in the way he waits for her, as though he's been rehearsing this moment for longer than she can imagine. He looks at her with tired eyes, but a clarity she hasn't seen in weeks. "I always knew this day would come," he admits softly, his words breaking the silence like glass. His voice quivers, but his meaning cuts cleanly. He tells her he could not bear to watch her suffer alongside him, to watch her spirit wither under the weight of his illness. Every time she reached for him and he pulled away, it was not disdain, not rejection, but love twisted into something cruel by circumstance. His hand finds hers with what little strength remains. "I pushed you away," he whispers, "because I didn't want you tied to a dying man." The confession hangs in the air, devastating in its simplicity. Camilla feels the anger she had carried for weeks collapse into grief as she sinks beside him, her tears falling freely now. Clutching his frail hand, she leans close and whispers through sobs that she would have stood by him anyway, no matter how much pain it brought her. Charles closes his eyes for a long moment before speaking again, his voice barely audible, yet full of emotion that no royal protocol could contain. "I know," he says weakly, "and that's what hurt the most." Those words cut through her, a final acknowledgement of the love they both fought so hard to protect but never allowed themselves to fully embrace. But as morning breaks, the palace is forced to confront the inevitable, and Camilla faces a future she never imagined. As the palace flags lower, and Camilla stands alone at the balcony, the world sees a queen draped in sorrow and a crown heavier than ever. In the quiet hours of dawn, Charles passes without fanfare, his final breath leaving Camilla's hand cold and trembling. There are no grand pronouncements, no ceremonial declarations, just a silence so profound it seems to swallow the entire palace whole. The official statement, released hours later, is measured and restrained, crafted carefully to shield the monarchy from the raw truths that had been festering behind closed doors. It speaks of dignity, of courage, of duty fulfilled. But it does not speak of betrayal, it does not speak of her. When Camilla finally emerges into the public eye, clad in black and carrying herself with what remains of her strength, the world witnesses a figure both regal and ruined. She holds her chin high, but her eyes tell a different story of anguish, of regret, of battles fought in rooms the public will never see. The questions come quickly and sharply. Will she remain queen consort? Or will she step aside, a casualty of both grief and scandal? Rumors swirl, impossible to contain. Some see her as the steadfast wife who endured a tragedy no crown could soften. Others condemn her as the architect of chaos, the woman who fought too hard, loved too desperately, and left a trail of broken trust in her wake. The nation mourns Charles, but its gaze never fully leaves her, scrutinizing her every move, dissecting her silence as if it holds all the answers. And yet, as she steps before the cameras, the weight of everything she has lost, and everything she still must bear, is unmistakable. Her expression, controlled but quivering, carries the unspoken truth of a woman who has lived through both triumph and devastation, who has worn both love and loss like armor. And as the world begins to move on, the shadows of the truth linger, hinting that this story is far from over. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.